our agenda for the day. Keep dropping those intros in the chat. And then I'd ask, as you move forward, what would be helpful for me is just to get a sense of, recognizing there's quite a few of you, but I'll try to take a look of just something for your future writing. Like, what is something that you hope you can achieve or do differently or learn? I know some of you mentioned off the top, this is maybe a bit of a refresh back to what I took, which was called in college rhetoric. But this is, could be a refresh, but we'd love to hear kind of how you're coming into this. And then I'll take you through a couple of things here, just how we think about persuasive writing, we being our organization at the Federation of American Scientists Day One Project, but also just more broadly, like some of the tips, tricks, and strategies that you can use to help drive progress on your own writing. I'll take you through a couple of activities and then hope to allow for a good bit of Q&A at the end, because that's my favorite part of these sessions. So my goals for you all in terms of takeaways, I'm going to make this a little bigger. There we go. So I hope that we can leave here today giving you ideas on how to improve your own persuasive writing, whether that's in an email or a memo or a letter that you're thinking of writing, something that where you want to communicate ideas about your work, especially if you're trying to compel action from a different person. I have some templates that I'll share out based on the activities that we'll do, but also this PowerPoint deck, which I think the team has already sent out to you all, sort of serves as a repository of ideas. So my design of the deck in itself was something that could kind of live alongside of your writing as you're going through. So I would encourage you to think of this as a resource. And then hopefully we can uncover some specific techniques, strategies that you can use and start to apply in your own writing.
And Josh, just to give voice to some of the things that are coming in the chat,
sure.
We've got a lot of people who are talking about really trying to simplify their work and make it, concise and clear. Ben, I think from Colorado, says the art of brevity. Making sure that folks are using plain language, and really great one from Melissa in Colorado, clearer communication across different types of customers and improving how to be concise. And last one that I want to give voice to, which is great, is better understanding how to be concise for the public sector versus academic. So please continue.
One of those might be an oxymoron, but
Go ahead.
Being concise as an academic is not something you're trained to do. So, but we will work on, and maybe Kate, you can help keep me honest on some of these as they come in.
Always, go ahead.
Cool. So just to kind of ground us in some different approaches or potential formats, and this is based off of delivering this in the past, but also the kinds of things I work on. A lot of people I recognize coming into this just want some assistance in thinking about how to write a more persuasive email. There are certainly tips that I will offer here that can help you be more concise, help you think about users and audiences, where they sit, how they operate, how they function. As I talk about some of these strategies, please ask if I can elaborate and offer more, because there's always examples I can try to bring into the concepts. Memos or letters to a supervisor, I think this is something else. I mean, this is actually sort of a lost art, in my opinion, as email has taken hold, that we don't have to communicate quite as much in formal memos or letters. And so I think actually some of the formatting of emails have kind of taken that on. So we can say more about that as well. Presentations are ways you might be thinking about conveying information and ideas in future work. I spent a lot of time working on specific policy ideas and policy proposals and how to communicate those. And then also, if you happen to be an entrepreneur or thinking of starting a nonprofit outside of government, I do a lot of work on fundraising. So a few different ideas. If you have others that I might have missed, please add them into the chat. Okay, so just to start, just a few tips and considerations. I think really, truly, writing is something we all can continue to get better on over time. And the old adage is definitely true. The more you do it, the better you can get. but it is part art and part science. So part art in that you can be creative, you can think about how to create narratives, you can think about the pathos and ethos and logos and the more components of formal rhetoric and how you appeal to certain emotions or the character of the person that you're trying to write to, using the structure, the logical structuring or logos of the document itself to try to help clearly communicate the messages that you want to get across. And then you also can use it as a chance to give yourself some credibility and establish that you have a voice. You might be a thought leader, or at least somebody who has some expertise in the way that you communicate and helping ensure that that comes across in the actual product or document. Within all of that, I think a lot about ideas as currency. With the work we do in policy circles in DC, I think about ideas as a down payment on a future conversation. So it's a way for me to try to clearly communicate what I want to see happen, but do it in a compelling way, because ultimately the email or the document that I'm writing, and what I mean by a down payment on a future conversation is that I'm actually trying to get something, the recipient of that thing, to do something on my behalf. Maybe it's setting up a meeting. Maybe it's that I want to understand what their position on a certain policy idea is. Maybe it's that I'm trying to build a relationship. So depending on what I want to happen, what that action is, you can start to take that into the design of your writing. And the way that you do that definitely improves the success or outcome that you're seeking, but really starting from the end and saying, what do I actually want to see happen here? And how can I design my writing for that end user? This came up already, but brevity and being concise, using short sentences with direct language. This to me mostly comes through the amount of time you're willing to put into something. Because I'll give you a few ideas, but doing things like removing commas in paragraphs or statements and trying to be very direct, using direct language, not being passive. Of course, some of the design and the user comes into play here, in terms of how formal or casual you want to be. Sometimes being casual actually helps you build a relationship. So ultimately, it comes back to whatever it is you want to see happen at the end. But another principle, this is, if any of you are behavioral science enthusiasts or behavioral economics enthusiasts, perhaps you've read the book Nudge. It was written by a guy named Richard Thaler, who basically won a Nobel Prize for this idea, which is kind of ironic, but about making it easy. It's just, how do you make it as easy as possible for the person on the receiving end to actually do something on your behalf? And so that often might mean including specific actions or steps that person can take to get started. It may even be something like, if you are trying to plan an event and you want to communicate it out to a large group of people, and you're asking for a node in a network or an influencer to share something out on your behalf, maybe you write the email out for them that you want them to forward. So that you're removing steps. You're trying to make it as easy as you can. Maybe if you want them to share something on social media, you write the tweets. So really thinking hard about what it is you're trying to do, and in the way that you write it up, making it as easy as possible for that person on the receiving end to execute. One of the things we see a lot in our writing is just logical structuring and flow. If you're trying to demonstrate a problem, say inside your institution, maybe it's related to procurement or hiring, and you've diagnosed what the problem is, making sure that it's really clear to the recipient in how your solution that you're proposing actually overcomes that problem. So just being really logically structured in how you set up a document. And then above all else, and I've said this a couple of times, I think already, but really try to know your customer. So, and this is the improper form of write, but before you write with a W, know who your customer is. And so how can you design a persona that helps you tell your story? So what I mean by a persona, that is try to gather an understanding of who the person is on the receiving end of your email, your letter, your memo? What do you know about them? Where do they sit inside your organization? Is it a politically charged environment? What do they like? What do they dislike? Have they worked on the issue in the past? How do they feel about it? So trying to gather as much data or having as many insights about that person before you write and send something to them, because that definitely influences the way you structure and how you talk about your ideas. I think many of us do this implicitly, but there is an actual process and a way that you can unfold a process to better help you gather data and insights about a person before you write to them. Cool. So just checking the chat here. Man, my typos bad when we're talking about writing. You guys should send me feedback on that. Structuring of successful outputs. So the bottom line up front or pitch. This is starting to get into some of the things we heard already of like, how do you convey things over email in a very short, concise way? So we often use this term bluff. So what's the bottom line up front, or what is your pitch? So if I'm a busy policymaker, or if I'm a busy executive inside the agencies and offices that you might work in, my time is limited. Out of the social media world, you probably see this term TLDR a lot, too long, didn't read. I think this is essentially what we're going for here, is how in the subject matter of your email and in the first 2 to 3 lines, can you get to the point of being able to communicate directly to me of why you're writing and what you're asking for and potentially how to do it. This is very much an art form because it does take a lot of practice in synthesizing ideas down, but it really can help improve the likelihood that the person on the other end is, one, going to read it, and two, going to potentially act on it. So if you can be very clear up front about what it is you're writing about and why, or what you're asking the recipient to do. Problem and opportunity challenge. I think this problem, opportunity, or challenge, like this extends to any form of writing, but really trying to communicate and convey in a short 3 to 5 sentences after you build out that bluff statement, what is the problem and what is your solution to it? In longer form memos or documents, this is also a way to layer in data and try to prove out what's important. Again, somebody asked before about writing in a concise way to an academic versus other audiences. Academics tend to belabor points and think that you need to use data. It's a bit of overkill. So what I usually instruct people to do is try to be selective in the data that you're utilizing. How can it help you in a couple 2 to 3 data points demonstrate the magnitude of the problem that you're trying to solve, and or the return on the investment? So meaning, if your change is to be implemented, how can you help show through data what will actually result in the change that you're advocating for? And again, here, I think also it's really important to consider the persona. So, and I'll talk through a couple of specific strategies of how you can start to gather data, but on the recipient, I mean, and I'm guessing in many cases, and so many of you were referencing your desire to improve your ability to be concise, especially in email, you're probably writing things that people within your office or within your initial stakeholder ecosystem. So there's certainly ways that you can start to collect information about these people, and you probably already know things about them. So as you're thinking about framing out the problem or opportunity and including the data that you might use, really taking into account what do I know about this person and what would they find compelling? Then point 3 here is explain what to do, but more importantly, how to do it. So what we see a lot of in the policy world is, and if any of you work, I mean, you all work in government agencies. I don't know if you get advocacy groups coming to you and trying to get you to do one thing or another related to your work. But typically, if you're willing to have a conversation with somebody about their idea, you already are at least halfway there. But what we see a lot of is people just continue to try to prove out why something is important. They may go to the extent of saying what a policymaker or a leader can do about it, but rarely do they actually tell you how to do it. So how can your audience actually take action what is an initial step, or if you can go further, an initial set of steps that they could take to implement the action. Again, this speaks back to the principle I mentioned before of how do you make it really easy? Help the person know on the receiving end how they can help you. Because if they want to help, you need to tell them what to do and how to do it. Finally, the last 2 points here often include some next steps. You can use things like defaults here, default statements that indicate if the person on the receiving end does not take an action, the default will be taken. So if you're asking for a meeting, you could say like something like, if I'd love to find time to chat with you. I'll plan to follow up directly with your administrative assistant if I don't hear otherwise. So things like that you set yourself up for the next step that you're trying to achieve. But more importantly here, I think it's making sure you summarize the actions that you propose and being very clear about what the next step is for following up. And then the last piece here, and this often depends on the type of document that you're curating, but because I would never suggest that you include an FAQ in your email necessarily. But one thing we find a lot of is as you're writing documents up, that you're starting to uncover key questions that you think are important to answer that can really stretch out the length of the document. So what you can start to do is think about what those questions are as you're starting to write and review, whether it's research or analysis, or even thinking about, persuading somebody in your office to take a specific action. What are the key questions that you're encountering that person or any person might have about what you're trying to compel action around? And just starting to make a list and answering those questions directly. If you don't end up including them in, say, a longer form memo, which is a way, you can attach an FAQ always as an appendix to a memo, because it really helps the reader understand, well, one, you've been very thorough in thinking through what the key questions about this action are, and two, that you've taken the time to answer them. So if I have things that I might be thinking about, I know, well, this person's taking this very seriously. They've anticipated all the things I've already thought about, and they have questions and answers to those questions right here. So I'll pause here for a second and just see if there's any questions coming in from the chat.
I think we're good on the chat. We've got
Okay.
some folks, and we've just kind of put a pin in those for Q&A.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So I'm going to walk through here just an example of what I think is a persuasive document that a group of folks that we worked with at the Day One Project put together, and just call out a few specific things. And then we'll talk through some additional strategies that you can pull out of this exercise, but would encourage you just to keep asking questions if you have them. So part of my work is to engage with the broader science and technology community, academics, researchers, nonprofit leaders, even former people like yourselves that have worked in government, and help convert ideas that they might have into policy actions. And so this was a group from the University of Maryland, based here in DC, that had an idea for how to eliminate billion-dollar disasters. So given the life and times that we're in right now, obviously climate is the top of the list for some of the potential existential threats to society. And so this was a paper that they put together to try to compel federal policymakers to act and eliminate the billion-dollar disasters. So you can see up front here, and this can be in the heading of a document, it can be the title of a document, it can even be the subject in your email, of being very crisp and clear about how to make your message or piece salient. So, and even more so, what's the result of the action if it's taken? So you can see it right here. Eliminate billion-dollar disasters, an equitable science-based U.S. disaster policy for a really resilient future. So right up front, to me, this is compelling, right? Because it's, how do I eliminate billion-dollar disasters? Something that any government official working on disasters might care about. Then to move into the initial section, the pitch or the bluff statement, and then this is sort of layered in with problem and opportunity. So you can see here very crisply and clearly, like every year Americans lose billions of dollars to natural hazards. And then it goes on to explain some of the nuances of that. The number of, you can start to see how data is included here. The number of billion-dollar disasters, those that cause over $1 billion in damage, is rising as a result of climate change, urbanization, and blah, 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 blah. So you can start to see very clearly in here how this group of authors is trying to create a compelling pitch. It's very clear in terms of what problem they're trying to solve. And potentially in the last section here, which is what I was saying before about giving policymakers a sense of where to start. An overhaul of U.S. federal disaster policy will reverse the trend and eliminate billion-dollar disasters. The goal requires actions at all levels. And then they go into the next section of getting specific about what those actions are. So here you go, what to do and how to do it. Plus you can start to see the audience come into play. So they're designing the text and language that they're using around the potential customer, the person that is on the receiving end of this document. So it calls out the Biden-Harris administration. And then it says, it gets into the specifics of how to do it. So beginning with an executive order instructing federal agencies to define federal roles in disaster response, et cetera. These agency level mandates and what they would do, how to do it. And then finally, legislative reform. So you can see specifically in here the different audience that they've called out, and at each level, they've offered specifics on what can be done and how to do it. Any questions?
I have a quick question just to jump in, not from the chat, my own, but others may have the same, and feel free to toss questions in the chat if you have them. We've been talking about audience, knowing the customer. I think given some of the things that we were hearing in the chat, I was thinking that the customer was like, Laura, who's the head of this team or something like that. Mm-hmm. For this, where they're targeting, the Biden-Harris administration, did this team really think about like, who are those people in the administration who are going to be doing this? So they're going more granular. If you could share a little bit more there.
Yeah, I think the output here ends up speaking more broadly to the administration, but the set of actions that they're recommending is directly aligned with individuals or offices within the administration that would have to take action to move the needle on this policy idea. So it's both an exercise in helping you understand and the territory or terrain, in thinking about who sits where and like what are you asking them to do and how can they help you, but also by thinking about that individual on the receiving end, that it's not going to be the president himself that would take action on this idea. It's going to be one of his staffers. And so some of this starts by understanding the issue area, and I'll talk about this in a few minutes, but mapping a little bit of the ecosystem. And so there's a set of policy precedents. There's a set of individuals inside offices that are responsible for executing on, say, FEMA's strategy of disaster response. And so starting by thinking about who those individuals are, where they sit, what matters to them, but then in the policy environment, what are the things that they're actually mandated to do? It starts to narrow in on a set of choice options that you might actually push for in terms of the kinds of policy ideas that you're presenting or trying to persuade someone to act on. I think at that level, the things that I would abstract for, depending on the kinds of output that you're putting together, whether it's an email or one of these day one policy proposals, which, selfish plug, if you have an interest, let me know. But the main thing to do is that the exercise of starting by thinking about that you're writing to a customer can really help you get specific about what it is you're trying to get done and how they can help. That's the main thing.
Great, thank you.
Sure. Okay. And so then you can see here, and I just pulled this out of the document, but this has some next steps in the FAQ. So here's a question from the FAQ. How does this proposal fit into existing disaster resilience efforts? You can see here, this is something that they encountered along the way in putting this together, but it's it speaks directly to something that they would anticipate that a customer for this policy idea would be asking. So I'm going to jump into some different strategies now that we walked through an example. And hopefully this can give you some specific tips in the or before, during, and after you write, that can help you produce and refine whatever it is your output is that you're looking to write. So these are some specific strategies that can help before you start. And so as you're starting to think about what it is that you want to put together. So you could see in that proposal I just featured that it was very clear in the title, like eliminate the $1 billion disaster. Like that's a pretty compelling, clear headline statement, and just one technique that can help you get closer to what it is that you want to see. And this is just anytime I write, I always am trying to think about what is it by me writing this thing am I trying to see happen? So if you can start at the end and outline what that outcome is, it can help inform and direct the way that you shape the structure and what you include in whatever you're writing. So one exercise that you can do that is to think about what is that headline? What would go into a future newsletter from your boss that might state the impact that you achieved out in the world in your office as a result of whatever it is you're trying to persuade them to do. And, it can be pretend, it's a newsletter, pretend it's a headline in the New York Times, pretend it's a 240 character tweet that the boss sends out. But the idea is that by thinking in this very outcomes oriented way, it can help you get really clear on what you're trying to do, and then get even clearer on how you communicate that. Second thing, and I think we've mentioned this a few times now, but developing this audience persona. So write down who your target audience is and what you know about them. If you don't know enough about them, are there ways that you can be a sleuth and try to better understand who they are? You can do that through Google searches. You can do that through looking at their social media profiles. You can do that by finding them and bumping into them when they go to get the coffee in the kitchen at your office, and trying to get to know them. But the idea here is to try to gather a set of insights about the person. What drives them in their life and work? Why do they do what they do? Why did they start working at your agency? Was it just because they needed a paycheck, or are they driven by some higher order mission in life? What are some of the constraints they might be facing? I think especially for people that are often our superiors, we don't always think about some of the constraints that might be limiting them in actually making decisions that would be beneficial, or things that we're trying to push for. So if you can try to understand constraints they're facing, that can influence the design and how you would present an argument, present a compelling memo, present a compelling email. And I think this is probably one of the more important things. If you can get to this level, what might have prevented them from taking action on the issue in the past? Because oftentimes, if they're good at their jobs, if they're leaders, they typically would have a sense of some of the challenges that might already be existing in the organization. But they're constrained in some form or fashion that's preventing them from taking action. In policy environments in government, we're lucky because there's so much transparency, at least in theory, and that most things have to be written down. So typically you can understand and uncover existing precedents and things that might actually have already been done inside an office or agency that would relate to what you're pushing for. So you can, again, be a good researcher, be a sleuth, uncover some of these things and try to better understand, what is the outcome you're trying to achieve? Who's this person or set of people that you would need to compel the act to change that outcome? And what do you know about them? A couple other exercises I would just try to thought exercises I would go through. Mapping the stakeholders. I think just, drawing up a little map of who sits where, how are they all connected, who are the key people, what are the key offices, places, groups. And I think putting it into a visual model sometimes helps before you start writing, because it gives you a sense of what the structures are, who sits where, how people are actually connected. I mentioned this, know the precedents. I think this is particularly important in policy environments. Like, what are the existing regs or strategy documents that actually show what the office or agency is signed up to do? Do you know what your audience has done about it, or have they worked on it in the past? The strategy documents in particular, I think, can be really useful tools. Even if it's something like you're advocating for a new IT system to be put into place because it can improve workflows for you and your subordinates. In that environment, in government environments, offices, agencies, departments have to often put out 5 to 10 year strategies that actually point to what their priorities are. And so you can leverage this in the way you write and structure things, because you can say things like, back in 2020, our office committed to whatever the strategy is. And it serves as a nice resource for you to point to. And then basically what you're telling the person on the receiving end is, this is a priority for our agency or institution, and I have a solution for you. And that's what you would include in your writing. And then finally, I think I talked about this more as an FAQ, but I think this is a really useful tool. Actually, when I was in grad school, this is an abbreviated version. One of my professors made me do 150 questions for a piece of research that we were working on, but this is 25. So think about what the 25 questions are, because if you start even just generating what the questions are, you're going to have to start thinking about how to answer them. And it's just really a good technique when you're trying to persuade somebody to act, because it helps you identify what are some of the things I haven't already considered. If you write those questions down and then try to answer them, it's something that you can include in a memo or output. Okay, I didn't see any questions, so I'm going to keep going. So that was the before part. So some simple tips and tricks that might help you in identifying the main segments of the memo or the email. I think often this is the way where you can start to do some logical structuring. And like, I even do this in emails sometimes, of like building sections that help the person on the receiving end understand what I'm writing and what I'm asking for. So if you don't have templates, you can design them yourself. Like, what's the summary ask up front? Here's what I'm asking you to do. Background information, next steps, like make it very clear, like use headings to your advantage. I think this also, back to the question out of the gate of someone, how can I be more concise and synthesize? If you give yourself headings, even if you don't put it into an email, if you draft an email in a Word document, say, before you put it into your email server, use headings to guide you. Like, what is it that I'm trying to say here? And be very specific and holding and keeping that guardrail up, that I'm only going to talk about this specific thing in this section. You can start defining the problem. So I think when you put the pen to paper, I talked about this out of at the top, but defining the problem in 3 to 5 sentences, like being very specific. Consider the framing based on the user, which I've said before, but help them understand the problem and help them understand the change that can occur if the problem is solved. And this is where you can use data. I mean, I don't think you need to, depending on the size and length of the document, you don't need to have an overkill amount of data. It's really just a couple key specific pieces of information that can help show the magnitude of the problem and help the person understand, as I said before, if something has changed, what's the return on the investment if we actually make it happen. If you can get to the costs and benefits, I mean, I kind of just said that, but this is more for longer form documents. I think, it's often comes back to resources. The two scarcest resources are time and money. So if you can get clear on what something would cost if the change is pushed through, how much time you would anticipate your office, your manager, whoever it is you're trying to get to act, how long it would actually take to make it happen. Like, let's give them that information, because it helps them understand how as they're taking a decision. And I think this just speaks again to the specifics of understanding your customer, but describe who needs to do what where, and how they need to do it. Again, people tend to focus primarily on the what and the why, and they leave out the how. So describe the actions you're recommending and get specific about how it can be done. Again, there's a lot of caveats here because it's, I would say it depends on the type of document that you're producing. In an email, for example, I think, again, coming back to the persona and like what you're trying to make happen, you may not need to have a long list of actions and tell the person specifically how to do it. Maybe you're just trying to write an email to set up that next call. As I said, it can be viewed as a currency or a down payment on a future conversation. So you kind of need to design for the customer, and as you get to know who they are and intuit what you're trying to do, it helps you get clearer on how you would write some of these things up. And then we talked about anticipating questions already. Any questions coming in, Kate? Are we good? Okay.
We're good. I would just ask, there's a lot here, so please do toss in questions into the chat as you have them.
And like I said in the beginning, like, I know this is a lot of words on slides. If I was just, in front of you all in person, I probably wouldn't do this, but I wanted to have something that you could really take away, because this is pretty dense and rich information. Like, some of it, depending on what you're trying to produce, might stick more than others, and depending on your style and role inside your organization. So this is hopefully a resource that you can take away and continue to use. And then finally, and I think this again gets back to questions up top on, or when we started on brevity and just how to be concise, because the refinement and editing, I think people spend a lot more time in producing the document than they do in thinking about how to refine it and make themselves clearer. So just a few things that I often do. Sometimes it depends on the amount of time you have, and recognize if this is just back and forth over office email, you probably don't necessarily have the time to send it out to an expert. But this is, again, depending on what you're trying to persuade someone to do, some tips that you can use. So if you have a persuasive memo or an email that you're producing, ask someone who knows the subject matter, and ask for them to offer feedback. Make sure there's enough time, but you never know how things can be interpreted by other people until you ask. So I would really encourage, above all else, that you have somebody else take a look if it's something that's really important and that you're trying to push for action on. Read it aloud to yourself, like how things sound. This is especially relevant for voice, formality. And again, like, depending on your office culture and the environment that you're operating in, being overly formal isn't always necessarily a good thing. If you're trying to get someone to act, maybe it's more important for you to build a relationship with them. And so using more casual, fun language, or even, again, office culture dependent, sometimes people put emojis into their emails just to kind of be fun and offer a different flavor. But depending on the culture, it's important to read it out loud to yourself so that you can actually understand tone. How does this sound? Am I being clear about what I'm trying to say? Because communicating over voice is different than written communication, which I'm sure many of you know. Step away for a day. Again, if you have time for this, like, if it's something that's important and you're working on it for a long time and trying to drive for progress on something, like, especially set it aside and return to it after you take a break. It sounds different. It reads different. You never know how you're feeling. Maybe you didn't eat lunch that day. So you might be a little more feisty. But it's important, if you can, just to give yourself space after you write and set something aside and return to it. Part of the editing and refinement process, this is something I always do, is just read back over the sentences themselves. Can I remove commas, remove the conjunctions, remove some of the spillover long run-on sentences, take out additional filler words? I think if you really read it over and over again, you can be more direct in your language. But this is something that just is a bit tedious and just takes some time. And the more you do it, the better you get at it. I mentioned tone, but Consider whether you struck the right tone. I think reading it aloud helps you do that, but you might think about using different kinds of pronouns. Does it need to be more expansive? Sometimes if you say things like you call people out by name, or you say you need to do blah blah blah, that can feel more like a directive as opposed to something that is more universal, inclusive, and inviting. So I would think about how you structure your pronouns. Of course, understanding again the user and their personal preferred pronouns is also important here, but this is more relevant to voice and just are you capturing the right tone? I talked about this earlier, but just make it very easy for follow-ups. How do you plan to follow up next? Ask for a meeting. Use the opportunity to get a very concrete next step established. So again, make it easy. Like if it is that you want a meeting, I mentioned the default approach earlier, but I include times in your email. Like make it really easy for them to look and understand like the next step. If it is that you want a meeting, give them the times and dates that you're available. Tell them how you plan to follow up. If you can let me know which of these times work for you, I'll send a Zoom invite. Like make it easy. You remove the steps, remove any potential friction that could happen after your engagement is sent out. Okay, I'm going to pause there because we're going to go into our exercise next. I'm going to come off my screen share. So our next exercise is really, we had sent out an email template over email in advance. I will pull up and share my screen. So it's no worries if you hadn't had a chance to take a look at it yet. But I'm going to share the email live here, and then we'll just give everybody a chance to review, and then we'll talk about, I'll explain the instructions in a moment, but I just want to see if there's any questions here. So Trace, how would tone, actions, other writing elements change to your position from which you are coming from? Yeah, I mean, I think this is largely like part of that customer discovery that I would call on the front end. Like you understand your culture and your organization better than I do. It depends on how long you've been there, of course. Like if you're new to an environment and you're unsure about how to strike the right tone, I think finding allies, understanding how other people read what people are doing, how are they talking about their work, what's the tone that they're striking. I think it can vary depending on a superior versus a subordinate. And this also like kind of comes back to the kind of leader you are. I like to try to put the relationships at the center of my work. So anybody that works with me, whether they're above me or below me, I try to build that relationship with them first so that I can better understand how I can communicate, because ultimately we can be more effective and efficient as a team if we've started by getting to know each other. So if you haven't had that opportunity, I would say those are just a couple things you can do is look to some of some others in the org, allies, how they approach things. I think it does like formality, if you're in, say, in like you work at the Department of the Army and it's a more hierarchical, traditional structured environment, the formality and the ways and the etiquette in which you engage with people is really critical. But it kind of takes the flavor of the organization that you sit in. So not to punt that question, but I think just trying to better understand what that culture is, both for people that you're reporting up to and the people that are reporting up to you.
Great. And Josh, I've captured the rest of the questions. I think just with 8 minutes left before the Q&A, because some folks will need to drop off for another.
Oh, okay. So we only have an hour.
Well, we have 90 minutes, so we can go a little bit longer, but I think some folks.
Sorry for being long-winded.
No, good.
Let's do the exercise. Okay. So Kate has graciously put it into the chat here. I'm going to share my screen again. One moment.
I'll also add it in a PDF form as well.
Okay. Okay, so we can see it here. So this is just a crowdsourced exercise. So I would just invite you to throw any comments into the chat. I'm going to show you 2 emails. We'll assess them each differently. First one, just to feel free to let me have it here. This is my email that I potentially would send out. But what do you see here? So any points for improvement in the chat, and then on a scale of 1 to 5, what do you think the likelihood that John would respond, would first open it and then actually respond? So scale of 1 to 5, 1 being totally unlikely, won't even open the email, and 5 would be he's going to offer to buy me a beer.
Josh, do you want to just give it a quick read for folks who
Sure.
might not be able to see the size of the screen?
So email title, talk about climate change. Dear John, my name is Josh Schoop. I'm interested in supporting USAID, which is the U.S. Agency for International Development, to find solutions for climate change. I have a lot of great ideas, and this is an important problem for many communities. I know your foundation funds climate change, and someone told me that you work on it with your partner, ABC Group. I would be excited to talk to you about my ideas and hope to hear from you. So they're rolling in. Okay. Incredibly vague. Very good. Title is not specific. Doesn't persuade John to take action. Yeah, so generally some pretty low marks for Josh. Yeah, no plan of follow-up. These are, yeah, it's very vague and indescript. There's no specific plan of action. There's no, yeah, this is one of the key things, Tanya, that it doesn't actually say who told you about the funding. So you want to make sure the person can understand the connection that you might have to them, like that the relationship, like playing on the social capital. Like people are going to act more if you're asking them to do something if they know how you found them. If it's a total stranger, could seem like a scam. Yeah, very good. So again, this is a little bit tongue in cheek and pretty over the top, but you can see how this email like probably isn't going to get much done. If, for example, I sent out 1,000 of these and I had a listserv, I'm like, I was trying, the quantity over quality approach. Maybe I could get somebody to respond, but even then I could definitely dramatically improve the way I would approach this. Yeah, Melissa, I know that's why people need to take our class. So send them over. So then let's do the second one now. Yeah, I wouldn't address, this is good, Bonnie. I wouldn't address someone I don't know by first name. Good point. Like, and this gets back to, I think, Trace's comment earlier or question, like formalities. And this is like my default. If it's somebody I don't know, I always am more formal. Because I think it's important to demonstrate and give them deference up front. So understand, like, is this a person that is a colonel? Is this a person that has a medical doctor? Whoever they are, making sure you're accurate in your salutation.
Two change of plan.
Cool. Okay, so
this one's going to be 3. I've changed the plan 2.
next we have a second email, and I'll read it for you all, and I'll try to see if I can get it on my screen here in its entirety. Okay, so email 2. Mobilizing $3 billion in funding to tackle the climate crisis. Connection from Daniel Jones. So, dear Dr. Smith, I am Josh Schoop. I help lead the Federation of American Scientists. Given your interest and focus on climate resilience and existing investments through your climate impact program, my colleague Daniel Jones suggested this might be an opportunity you would be interested in discussing. As part of our portfolio, I'm currently pursuing an opportunity to drive progress on global climate resilience in support of the President's Prepare initiative with the U.S. Agency for International Development, aligned to the administration's climate goals. The potential to create a pipeline of policy initiatives is immense and could help USAID unlock over $3 billion in private finance to target climate resilience issues in the developing world, including East Africa, where you and your colleagues spend a lot of time. I outline a summary of our approach and work below and include a more detailed concept note in the attachment to this email. We're looking for partners to collaborate on this while also seeking to identify funding and help us get this off the ground. I'm available to speak at your convenience and happy to organize a time for us to talk over Zoom. If you have any availability next Thursday or Friday afternoon, I'd be happy to share a calendar invite. And then below, I'm not going to read this, but it's the summary of the idea. And then there's also a full attachment with the full longer form concept. So let's see what people thought. Again, 1 to 5, 1 being no one's going to open at 5. Dr. Smith's going to ask me to go get a beer. Okay, we got a 3, like it. Tough crowd, tough crowd. Okay, so it's better than the first, the general synopsis. So here are some of the ideas of how to make it better. Too lengthy, some bullet points could highlight, great. TLDR. Yeah. Shorten the email. Save some for a meeting. Yeah. So that's great. The most important info should be up top. Okay. So yeah, this is all right. It's, depending on the person, customer, we could pick specific things out of this, I think, as many of you have already done. But a few things I'd like to call out that, like, I could have used a little bit better structuring. Like, I could have had up top, "Dear Dr. Smith," I could have introduced myself, and then below I have a few things I'd like to cover, summary, and then included just a summary statement with my specific ask. And then below that, I could have had some more of the specifics. So if the person wants to keep reading, they can, but you're basically giving them up top the specific thing that you're looking for. Headings would have been good. Yeah. So I think that's the main thing I would have done differently, and probably also having somebody copy edit it before I write it. Again, like, it really depends on the person and what you're trying to get done. Like, this is a request to try to get a funder interested in what I'm potentially pushing. This might not have gotten anybody to open it. I have no idea. But some of the things I would try, and it kind of depends on the strategy. So understanding who the person is, well, maybe Daniel Jones is a person that Dr. Smith already works with and funds. So drawing on that relationship to give you some street credit and validate you. So back to some of those points we made earlier, offers credibility. But yeah, I think generally what you all shared is spot on. So I'm going to stop there with the email exercise. We can keep going, but I know Kate, we mentioned 3:00 that potentially some folks might have to drop off.
Yeah, all good. If you want to keep moving there, we're welcome to. I did just want to call out, I noticed that in that email, you didn't say anything about, like, I hope your summer is going well.
Yeah.
Just so maybe you can talk a little bit about that. And then we have some folks who will drop off at 3, and then we'll just transition to a Q&A. And for folks who have questions, toss them in the chat, and we'll also have folks come off mute.
Yeah, I think that some of that's like personal preference. Again, like, my default is always trying to think about what I know about the person on the receiving end. If I'm trying to be really concise and direct, but yeah, that could have been a strategy potentially. Like, this is a person I'm trying to break in with and get to know. Like, maybe I want them to view me as someone who is more inviting, friendly, versus, they could be more specific, get to the point, cut to the chase. Why are you emailing me? But some of that's just personal preference and getting to know the person. I don't usually start emails with questions, like, how are you? Some people like to do that. That's not my style. I think it's sort of just additional information. So a statement like what Kate is saying, I hope this finds you well. People like to open with that often. But it's sort of personal preference and understanding the recipient and what you're trying to get done.
Great.
How
Cool.
would you provide feedback as a copy editor when it comes to cutting words out? It just takes a lot of refinement. Like if you can read sentences and like cut out some of the, what I would call like modal verbs, like will, should, could, can, have been, like you can be very much more direct if you just think about the relationship between the subject and the verb. And then also removing the commas, like just start cutting commas out and see what happens, like see how it changes the way the thing reads. But like, again, like sometimes you want to be more casual, so you don't need to go through and like, copy edit an email. So it kind of comes back to the recipient. Any other questions I might have missed that we could tackle now? Otherwise, I have one more activity, or just I can walk through why don't I walk through this additional template? I don't know that we'll have time to do all of the exercises, but just to show you a little bit more of what's in my deck. Does that sound good, Kate?
That sounds good. And I'm actually just going to turn off the recording so we can keep moving. But yeah, feel free to go ahead.
We can like swear and stuff now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Someone